All right, let's talk about one of the biggest, quietest revolutions happening in America right now. It's a massive shift in the country's religious landscape, and it all kicks off with one pretty surprising number.
29%. Just let that sink in for a second. That's how many adults in the U.S. now say they have no religious affiliation. We're talking atheists, agnostics, or people who just say nothing in particular. Not that long ago, that number was tiny, like in the single digits. Now, it's almost a third of the entire country.
And to give you a sense of just how huge that 29% is, yeah, Christians are still the majority, but this group, the so-called knowns, is now bigger than the entire Catholic population of the United States. It's bigger than any single Protestant group. This isn't a fringe movement anymore. It's a massive demographic force.
So, that's got to be the question, right? Why? Why are so many people, in such a short amount of time, walking away from organized religion? Well, the answers are, of course, super complex and personal, but researchers have started to see some really clear patterns emerge.
So to really get a handle on this, we've got to look at three main drivers. It starts with a clash of ideas, then moves into people's actual experiences with these institutions, and finally, it's about a fundamental change in our culture.
First up, we've got the intellectual side of things. For a lot of people, there's just a fundamental disconnect. They see the world through a lens of science and reason, and they're looking for evidence that just isn't there for them. And, maybe even more importantly, there's a huge values clash over social issues. For a growing number of people, things like an institution's stance on LGBTQ+ rights or gender equality, well, it's an absolute deal breaker.
But, it's not always about abstract beliefs. A lot of the time, it's about what actually happened to people. They felt judged or excluded or saw a level of hypocrisy that they just couldn't stomach. And let's be honest, the endless, high-profile scandals, whether it's about abuse or money, have caused a massive breakdown in trust. When people see religion getting tangled up in partisan politics, that moral authority just evaporates.
And then there's this third group. And for them, it's not some angry breakup with religion. It's more like a quiet drifting apart. It just doesn't feel relevant to their day-to-day lives. Many of them would even say they're spiritual, but they want to explore that on their own terms, without the institution. And really, this just taps into a much bigger cultural shift toward valuing your own individual path over sticking to tradition.
So those are the big picture reasons. But to make this feel a little less abstract, let's zoom in on one very specific theological concept that for a lot of people is a major, major stumbling block: the whole idea of original sin and atonement.
I mean, we've all heard this line, right? From Amazing Grace. It's a beautiful, powerful idea for millions of believers. But just for a second, try to hear it with fresh ears. Imagine you're new to this. How does it feel to walk in the door and be asked to identify yourself as a wretch? For a lot of modern people, that's a tough pill to swallow.
See, that idea of being a wretch comes directly from the doctrine of original sin. This is the belief that every single person is born inherently flawed, broken, and tainted. So right from the get-go, the framework is that there's something fundamentally wrong with you and you need to be saved from yourself.
And this gets at a really critical psychological distinction. There's a world of difference between healthy guilt, which is feeling bad about something you did, and toxic shame, which is the feeling that you are bad. Guilt can motivate you to be better. Shame just paralyzes you. And a heavy focus on original sin can, for some, foster that toxic shame that modern psychology tells us is pretty damaging to our well-being. So if the problem is this inherent brokenness, the solution offered is atonement, a sacrifice. And this is often communicated with some really intense, graphic imagery, like this line from another old hymn. The idea of a literal blood sacrifice, of washing away stains with blood. For many people today, that imagery can feel violent or primitive and really hard to square with the idea of an all-loving God.
Okay, so we've seen why millions are walking away. What does that actually mean for the country? What are the real-world consequences? And what, if anything, are religious institutions trying to do about it?
Well, the most obvious consequence is this. Churches are literally closing their doors. We're talking thousands every single year. All across the country, you have congregations that are getting older and smaller, and they just can't afford to maintain these huge old buildings. This isn't just some abstract shift in belief, it is physically changing the landscape of our towns and cities.
So what's the response? Well, the institutions that are trying to adapt are basically trying to tackle the problems head-on. They're exploring ways to evolve their social stances to be more inclusive, especially on LGBTQ+ rights. They're trying to rebuild trust with radical transparency and accountability, and they're working to show that faith can actually be a powerful, tangible force for good in the world today.
But what if the issue isn't really the doctrines or the scandals? What if it's just apathy? If religion is just slowly becoming irrelevant, does its decline actually matter? Are we losing anything important? Well, believe it or not, a whole bunch of scientific research is suggesting that, yeah, we might be.
Just take a look at this. Study after study, all peer-reviewed, show this incredibly consistent link between being involved in a religious or spiritual community and having better mental health. For example, people who are religiously engaged consistently report lower rates of major depression, anxiety, and even suicide.
And if that's not surprising enough for you, how about this one? This is wild. Epidemiological studies have found that people who go to religious services regularly live longer than those who don't. We're talking up to 7 years longer on average, even when you control for things like smoking or exercise.
So, what's going on? Well, the research suggests it's not really about the supernatural stuff. It's that these institutions, when they're at their best, provide things that we know are absolutely essential for humans to thrive. They provide strong social networks to fight off loneliness. They give a framework for meaning and purpose. And they encourage us to be better to each other through things like volunteering and charity.
And that leads us to the final and maybe the most important question of all. We totally get why people are leaving these places. The reasons are real, they are powerful, and they are valid. But at the same time, we have all this data that shows that what these institutions provide, things like community, a sense of purpose, social connection, are vital for us. So, as these traditional institutions continue to fade, the huge question for all of us is, where are we going to find our meaning? And where are we going to build our community?